As an English teacher, you say, paint a picture with your words. Right? Now you literally can. This is a crazy thing that we're living with, where you can now literally paint a picture with your words by even specifically saying, do it in a watercoloring style, and you'll get a watercolor image.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by my new mini course, Learn ChatGPT This Summer, which is now available to all members of my AI and Education membership. Join today and stay for 1 month, the whole school year, or however long you like. You'll get instant access to my mini course, Learn ChatGPT This Summer, with 6 short videos. It's built into my AI and Education membership, so you'll get all the member perks too, like a new video update each month and plenty more to explore. Go to my website, classtechtips.com/AI, to find the link to the membership. That's classtechtips.com/AI for all of the details. This week's episode is titled Comics in the Classroom and an AI Connection with Nicholas Provenzano. I have known him for over a decade now, and when I heard about some of his work with generative AI in the classroom, I knew he would be the perfect guest for this summer episode. Let's dive into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to chat with you today about comics in the classroom and the AI connection to all of this. But before we jump in, can you share a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Nicholas Provenzano. Everyone, it's so great to be here with you, Monica. My day-to-day, I am a teacher who works at a pre-K-12 independent school here in Michigan. And my day-to-day is different day-to-day. Some days I have direct instruction with my 6th, 7th, or 8th graders, teaching design classes and technology. Other days I'm working with 1st or 2nd graders, teaching them to use screwdrivers for the first time. I might be working with 10th or 11th graders and sometimes teaching them to use screwdrivers for the first time. So it's varied. I'm an instructional coach as well. So sometimes I'm working with tech integration with teachers, like I said, pre-K-12 across the board in different ways. So day-to-day is different day-to-day, and I like it.
Yeah, and just having that perspective, I'm sure, will inform a lot of our conversation today in terms of the things that you're seeing or what you're hearing other educators in your community talk about. And, today we're talking about comics in the classroom with that AI connection, as I mentioned. But I do want to start off with comics. Could you share what inspired you to integrate comics into your teaching, into the work that you're doing with students, and what was their initial reaction?
Yeah, so my previous life before being the tech guy, I spent 15 years teaching high school English. And so as a high school English teacher, we had these tracks where after you took grade 10, which was like American literature, you had a group of kids that either took AP track, and then you had a group of kids that could take a series of like electives. Well, there were a group of students that I felt like were underrepresented in that love graphic novels, that love like the art behind them. And so I created a class that was designed for a semester elective to support those students. And creating classes in public school system is not an easy process. You've got student review, parent review, administrative review for every single text that you wanted to submit. But I wanted to explore, graphic novels as a medium similar to any other traditional text that you would find. And so my personal love of comic books and, that type of medium was something that I wanted to share with students. And they were super excited when that class ran. It was like packed. And so I had a class like per semester, and, we were on board. Our textbook was called Understanding Comics, and it actually is a comic. So it's a comic book that is a textbook that is in comic form. And it was like great. And so to have that for them to understand sort of like the science behind comics and how we as people interpret, visuals, and how, something as adding 3 lines behind something makes it run. Like, oh, that person's moving if you add 3 lines. So adding something as simple as that changes the meaning, and then connecting that to language, how a comma in the right spot or the wrong spot can change the meaning. And so using these type of like stories and connections for kids to dive a little bit deeper into not only language, but the visual language, I think all of us take for granted every day.
And I would imagine for students who were either curious or were already consuming a lot of comics or graphic novels before entering that classroom. So just the ability to put on a creator hat or to do that close reading of a text that we sometimes think only belongs in one part of the day, right, is so interesting. And so, how have comics and graphic novels impacted student engagement and learning in the environments that you support? Any memorable projects or outcomes to share with listeners?
Yeah, I would say that having taught traditional literature for 15 years, and The Great Gatsby, Huck Finn, those type of stories, and then teaching things like Mouse or Persepolis, which are 2 award-winning graphic novels, and having conversations where the students would say, it's tougher to read these graphic novels, but it's more fun because, I can look at a panel and try to decipher all the different things the artist was trying to say and what that tells to the story, versus I can just look at words on a page and they're just words. Like,
Right.
I can't see necessarily what they want me to see. And so for some of my students that are more visually oriented, they would just say, hey, I can do this. And so, the projects and things that the kids would be able to choose, especially moving forward, because I would say this isn't an art class. So this isn't an expectation that you guys are creating, comic art. Like, that is not where we're going with this. But if you are a student that is inclined to create art, to create comics, you'll have this opportunity to create for your final exam. And so I would have some of those more artistically inclined students, making comics, whether it's comic panels or full on graphic novel books for like their final exam, to be able to tell a story. And I think anytime you give students an opportunity to tell their story, you're going to see a tremendous amount of engagement. Like, it was one of these classes where, as an elective, the kids that were there because they wanted to be there. And so I would tell them, I'm like, you chose this. So the expectation is that you're going to do this. And so, sometimes we're going to read things that maybe are not your like tea, but there's tremendous value in understanding like the artwork that was chosen or the person behind this. And so, for me, the freedom that these students were given in this class, you would not necessarily see in a traditional class, was so empowering. And for just some of the kids saying things like, I wanted to tell this story forever and I just didn't have a medium. Like, they just assumed every story they wanted to tell had to be a traditional short story, prose, piece, and showing them how a structure of a graphic novel can work, and having kids pair up. Like, my friend's a really good artist, I have a really good story. and I'm going to tell the story and they're going to go, that's how comics are made by a lot of places.
Right.
Like you have the storyteller and you have the artist and they get together and they talk. And so to have them see that process and how collaborative that is, for the artist to take an idea and put their own spin on it, and for, the writer to be like, oh, yeah, like that's totally what I was thinking, but I didn't say that, but that's in my brain what I wanted to
Mhm.
see. And so I think what I saw was a lot of students that definitely call neurodivergent students today finding success in reading things and doing things that as the society has judged as not real books or not, real reading. And I think empowering them to validate what they love as literature and to show them all these examples. And, Neil Gaiman is an amazing writer, author, and, he writes amazing graphic novels and short stories, and you can do both. Like you can, you're not limited to your storytelling mediums. And so to be able to pull examples like that and showcase to students that, art and creativity and, English language arts, is a part of that, collection, I think is super powerful. And, it helps turn some maybe kids that necessarily weren't considering themselves as readers to be readers. And that, graphic novels are novels and reading those is reading. And I think that's still a fight a lot of teachers face, across the country.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. It's something that comes out on like what counts, right, as a reading material or something that a student might create. And I love what you mentioned about the collaborative aspect too, where we often think of a writer as being by themselves in a dark room, with a keyboard, maybe a typewriter, maybe a pencil on their hand, kind of all alone. And they're going to then just produce this magical thing when they're finished, whatever that might mean, right? But just the emphasis that you placed on the collaborative process, right? Someone might take on this role. I really need feedback. I don't know how to bring this visually to life, right? Is so magical. And, it gets to the place where I'm hoping to pivot a bit to talk about generative AI. Just yesterday, as I was sharing before we hit record, I was with a group of educators where I don't know how they would all describe themselves, right, as creators, right? But they were able to type in a prompt and generate some really fantastic visuals that complemented the work that they were doing. So, as we think about generative AI and all of the use cases, how do you use it in your classroom, in the work that you do with your colleagues? What tools or platforms or strategies have you found most effective in the past couple of years that we've been in this space now?
Yeah, it's been surreal because it's another, tool in the tool belt, so to speak, right? Like it's another option to take lessons or projects to another level, but it also gives students the opportunity to see things that they're creating and to see it come to life, visually with, art. So one of the generative AI tools that we use as a class is Adobe Express. And so they've got the text to image feature in there. So I was playing with this myself and I said, how cool would it be to work on descriptive language? Like to learn about the words that we use and what does that look like? You're trying to, as an English teacher, you say, paint a picture with your words, right? Well, now you literally can. Like this is like a crazy thing that we're living with where you can now literally paint a picture with your words by even specifically saying, do it in a watercoloring style and you'll get a watercolor image, right? Like it's one of those things where, I've been teaching now over 20 years and just like the 20 years before that, when the teacher's like, I started off with, an overhead projector and I made dittos. And like, this is the world that we're living in where I'm like, I had to roll the TV in and now I can stream from my own phone. Like these changes, I think as teachers, and Monica, this, like you either are going to get on board or you're going to get left behind. And so for me, I wanted my students to experience, generative AI, especially with the images, firsthand to give them an idea of what it can do. And so the first project that we did was being at a pre-K-12 school is, just down the hall are the first graders, the kindergarten. So we are lucky to be able to pair up with them for projects like whenever we want. So I had this idea of working with the kindergartners to write a picture book. And so my students would fill out an outline of a story that I've sort of put together. And then they would go to the kindergartners and ask them to describe the different scenes and the different creatures and the different, whatever it was, and then take that information back to the generative AI and create those images and then drop those images into the book that they have created. And then they are able to hand over a personalized storybook to each individual student. And the looks on those kids' faces, like to be able to print that out and to be able to do all of that in Adobe Express was like so simple. And, it took tweaking, and that was part of the process. Like, well, I want the monster to look like this, or I want the background to look like that, and learning how keywords can change. And, what I think a lot of people might not think about is the value of the written word in terms of understanding and having a complex understanding of words to create images. Learning to write a prompt is now a skill that people need, because you might get there after 10 sentences. Someone who's really good can get there in one or two.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what kids were learning. And it's like, oh, I have to put all of it in. Yes. You want all the information, and it doesn't know what you mean. It just, you have to prompt, you have to tell it. And then the next extension of that was I took the same group of kids, but we worked with first graders, and we turned the first graders into superheroes. We used the green screen features. I set up some green screens, and the students wrote down all the different poses they needed the superhero to be in. I bought masks and capes for every single kid. So every first grader got a little mask and a cape. And they asked the kids for these poses. And then my students generated the villain for the story and put them all together using Adobe Express. And what's cool is that you can add motion to images.
Yeah.
And so we created what's actually known as a motion comic, where you turn the page and actual action happens on each individual panel. And so the kids could actually see themselves as superheroes, like flying. They could see themselves, punching the bad guy. And so to be able to not only have the visual version of that, to handle a digital copy that they can use, they had a physical comic book as well. So they were a cartoon character, comic book superhero in a comic book that my students were able to hand them. And so for my class, learning how to pace a story, you have X amount of spaces in the comic book. Learning to pace that is not an easy thing to do. And so learning to tell the story, learning to have the conflict. So all of those ELA elements that I know and love and have taught, to implement that in a graphic design classes, which it was for that trimester, really gave those students the opportunity to stretch and flex those ELA muscles.
So much there, just in terms of what you're giving listeners here, a tool, right? A free tool they can jump into and try out. 2 really dynamic project ideas, and that collaboration component between different groups of students, right? The younger students, the older students. But then the common theme with all of that too, right, are all of these ELA skills, right? And I've taught at the upper elementary level, where that paint a picture with your words is something that's come out of my mouth, I don't know, 100, 200 times, right, in different units of study over the years of my teaching. And just the ability to say, like, what am I missing, right? A different level for thinking about revisions for a student writer. It's just really powerful. And, for a teacher who's listening, or a coach who's listening, or an admin who's listening and bringing some things back to their colleagues, right? This idea of generative AI can feel like a really big term, right? Comics in the classroom there might be some hesitation around that if you don't think of yourself as being particularly creative. I'm using air quotes, right? This is not a video podcast, so I just want to call that out. So if someone is a little hesitant or unsure where to start, is there one quick thing they can do to jump into this and build some confidence and capacity for bringing this back to their students?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest what I suggest to my students is to learn by doing, and to jump into a tool, again, like Adobe Express, which is free. You can jump right in and go text image, and then type in the craziest thing that you ever wanted to see. If you want to see a pink alligator wearing a tutu and a sombrero, you type that in, you're going to get it. And it's, that's how I introduce it to my students. To go, type in the weirdest thing that you can think of, and drop it into there. And they're all just rolling on the ground laughing because it's ridiculous. And so once you get the ridiculous out of the way, then you can focus on, I needed this for this lesson. I couldn't find the right thing online. Now I can just create the thing that I want. So I think playing with it yourself is always step one. And step two, when you introduce it, to tell kids, I don't know everything about that, but we're going to learn together. That gives you the credibility. So when something weird happens, you can go, that's crazy. I've never seen that before. I'm like, wow. Okay, well, let's figure this out together. And I think that empowers yourself and the students to go, oh, they're with me on this learning journey instead of overlording me on this learning journey. So when you can be side by side with them, I think that's the powerful experience because the kids will engage further knowing they have a partner as opposed to, an overseer.
Yeah. And just that, particularly with this technology that's changing so quickly, right? We can only be co-learners in this experience, right? The kids know that this is new and we can't know everything about it. So such a good reminder. So where can people connect with you? Where can they follow along? Where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, one of the best places to find me is on the internet. So you can find me on X, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn at The Nerdy Teacher. So you can find me. There is a website, social media account out there. I pretty much have locked down at The Nerdy Teacher at it. So you can check me out there. They all do different things. If you want more long form, my website, thenerdyteacher.com is the way to go. Again, more visual stuff. TikTok I've rolled into recently the past few months. So a lot of tips and things on there as well.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to link out to all of that for listeners so that they can find you and follow along. But thank you so much for your time today and sharing these great resources and ideas with listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. And, for everyone else there, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm one of those people that love to connect and help you with your school, your district, or whatever. I work with all of you guys all the time, all over the country. So don't hesitate to reach out. I love connecting.
It was so much fun chatting with Nick Provenzano today. And I want to finish up this episode like we always do with a few key points to make this EdTech easy. Give students opportunities to tell their stories. Connect generative AI to writing activities. Bring students of all ages together. When trying generative AI, get the ridiculous out of the way. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of resources from this episode, including all of the ways to connect with Nicholas Provenzano, by heading to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode. This episode is sponsored by my new mini course, Learn ChatGPT This Summer, which is now available to all members of my AI and Education membership. Join today and stay for 1 month, the whole school year, or however long you like. You'll get instant access to my mini course, Learn ChatGPT This Summer, with 6 short videos. It's built into my AI and Education membership, so you'll get all the member perks too, like a new video update each month and plenty more to explore. Go to my website, classtechtips.com/AI, to find the link to the membership. That's classtechtips.com/AI for all of the details. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.